South China Sea, midnight November 1944. The sky is black glass, the waves whispering like static against steel. Beneath that darkness, a shape cuts through the water. USS Dragonfish, silent, stalking. Inside the control room, red lamps flicker over sweating faces. Men whisper, breath held. The radar ping beats like a pulse. Steady, sharp, closer every second. Convoy bearing 085, range 8,000 yards, says the sonar man. His voice trembles. Multiple screws. Heavy tonnage. Commander Charles Ironhand Walker leans over the plotting table, eyes burning with focus. He's been chasing this convoy for 2 days. 10 Japanese transports escorted by destroyers armed to the teeth. The textbooks say back off, stay submerged, attack from distance. Walker doesn't do textbooks. He looks at his XO. If we go by the book, we'll get 1 hit, maybe 2. And if we don't? The XO asks. Walker grins, the kind that makes men nervous. Then we rewrite it. He climbs to the periscope, scans the black horizon. The convoy is there. Faint shadows against a restless sea. His watch officer whispers, "Sir, that's suicide. Surface attack, full spread. The brass will hang you." Walker lowers the scope. They'll have to catch me first. At 041 hours, Dragonfish breaks the surface. Water cascades off her hull as diesel engines rumble to life. The air smells of salt, oil, and tension. The deck gun crew braces, ready but silent. Tubes 1 through 6, stand by. The torpedo men glance at each other. The manual forbids this. 6 at once, multiple targets, no computer aim. But they obey. The captain's madness has gravity. Range? Walker barks. 2,700 yards, comes the reply. He exhales, almost smiling. Perfect. Then, fire 1, fire 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each launch thunders through the hull. The sub rocks as compressed air roars down the tubes. On the radar, 6 streaks appear, glowing lines cutting toward destiny. The first explosion hits like a hammer, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. The control room shakes, glass rattles, gauges dance. Outside, the horizon blooms orange. Flames lick the sky as a tanker erupts, splitting in half. A destroyer veers straight into a second blast. The ocean turns to chaos, ships colliding, alarms screaming, metal dying. "Sir," the XO whispers, staring at the fire-lit sea. "That was illegal." Walker watches the inferno through the periscope, face calm. "So is losing," he says. He orders a hard dive. As Dragonfish sinks beneath the boiling surface, the ocean above glows red with the light of destruction. 9 minutes. 7 ships gone. Doctrine shattered. Before Walker's 9-minute storm, the U.S. Navy had a rule. One that bordered on religion. Submarines did not fight on the surface. They stalked, they waited, and they struck only from the shadows. Caution was doctrine. Caution was survival. The Pacific Fleet's manual on engagement, revised in 1943 after heavy early losses, left no room for improvisation. Every attack had to be submerged at safe distance, with 1 torpedo per target. It was precision warfare by committee. Elegant in theory, suicidal in practice. Those who broke the rules paid for it. The USS Wahoo and USS Grampus had been lost to aggressive surface attacks in 1943. The Navy turned their wrecks into warnings. "Do not improvise," the memo said. "Do not take risks. The enemy will wait. You will not." That culture of fear ran deep. Submarine captains became chess players instead of hunters, cautious, predictable, almost mechanical. Orders from Pearl Harbor were clear. 1 mistake means an entire crew. To Walker, that was the problem. He'd spent enough time at sea to know that the ocean punished hesitation more than risk. He called the manual a guide to dying slowly. The brass hated him for it. His peers feared him. His crew worshipped him. Walker believed that by 1944, the war had changed. Radar, sonar, and code-breaking gave submarines new tools. But doctrine hadn't caught up. "They want us to fight with slide rules," he'd tell his XO, "while the enemy's using instincts." He saw proof of that in the Japanese Convoy system. The Imperial Navy's destroyers adapted fast. They zigzagged, dropped depth charges preemptively, and used decoys. They were learning. The Americans were not. Aboard the Dragonfish, every crewman knew that Walker didn't read orders. He rewrote them. He taught his men to trust timing, not procedures. He ran drills that mimicked chaos, firing 2 torpedoes simultaneously at unpredictable intervals. A chaos pattern, he called it. It was madness to outsiders, but the results didn't lie. In 12 patrols, the Dragonfish never missed a single confirmed target. Her kill-to-launch ratio was the best in her flotilla. The price was paperwork. Walker's superiors reprimanded him twice for reckless engagement. Each time he signed the report, wrote, "Noted," and went right back to sea. He didn't care about the Navy's fear. He cared about math, and the math of caution to him was simple. Slow equals dead. In his words, doctrine doesn't win wars, daring does. By the time the Dragonfish left port for its final patrol, Walker wasn't planning to bend the rules. He was planning to break them. Completely. Charles Ironhand Walker was born in 1911 in the flat farmlands of Iowa, a place where the horizon taught patience and storms taught timing. His father was a blacksmith who said little but swung a hammer like it owed him something. His mother taught him to shoot tin cans off fence posts at 200 yards. When Walker joined the Navy in 1933, the recruiters noted 2 things: perfect eyesight and a temper that wouldn't fit in a uniform. At the Naval Academy, he ranked high in engineering and marksmanship, but low in attitude compliance. His instructors wrote, "Brilliant tactician, dangerous if unsupervised." They were right. By 1942, when the Pacific exploded into chaos, Walker was already a veteran submariner, second in command aboard the USS Swordfish, where he earned his nickname after surviving a depth charge that crushed a bulkhead and broke 3 of his ribs. He refused morphine and stayed at his post, bloodied and furious, barking orders until the sub slipped away. "Pain's a distraction," he told his men afterward. "Ignore it, and it ignores you." When the Swordfish returned to Pearl Harbor, he was promoted to command his own boat, the USS Dragonfish. From day one, it was clear this was not a Navy captain in the conventional sense. Walker treated his crew like a rancher treated horses. Firm hands, no pity, total loyalty. He banned formal salutes on deck, allowed coffee during battle stations, and made every crewman memorize the engine layout in case the engineers died first. His XO, Lieutenant Glenn Sparks Harland, once asked him why he ignored so many rules. Walker's reply was simple: "Because the rules were written by people who've never been depth charged." The Dragonfish's early missions were textbook, and Walker hated it. Convoy escorts, reconnaissance runs, ordered to fire 1 torpedo and flee. He called it bureaucratic suicide. So he began to improvise. He'd linger on the surface longer than permitted, tracking Japanese ships visually instead of through sonar. He'd dive late, sometimes after the enemy had already spotted them. He wanted to feel the fight, not hide from it. In June 1943, he pulled off his first miracle, ambushing a destroyer escort off the Celebes coast by firing from less than 900 yards, surfacing between explosions, and blasting it again before diving. Every manual said that was impossible. Every sailor who saw it knew it worked. Word spread fast. Crews whispered about Walker's nerve. Some said he had a death wish. Others said he just understood something they didn't, that survival wasn't about rules, it was about rhythm. By late 1944, he'd sunk over 20 ships, but headquarters was tired of his defiance. They ordered him back for evaluation. He showed up to the meeting in a sweat-stained khaki shirt and said, "You can either court-martial me or let me keep sinking their ships. Pick one." They sent him back out. 2 months later, he made history. By the end of 1944, Japan's war machine was bleeding out, not from battle, but from hunger. Every drop of oil, every shell, every grain of rice that fed its empire moved by sea. Nearly 94% of Japan's supplies traveled through vast convoys, slow-moving steel arteries stretching from Singapore to the Philippines and Formosa. Protecting those routes had become an obsession for the Imperial Navy. Destroyers prowled ahead of merchant ships like wolves guarding sheep. Armed trawlers and mine layers circled the convoys, releasing depth charges at random. Every convoy was supposed to be untouchable, and on paper they were. For American submarines, it was a nightmare. Radar detection was inconsistent. Torpedoes malfunctioned 1 out of every 3 launches, and Japanese sonar, once primitive, had become lethal. By late 1944, U.S. subs had sunk hundreds of ships, but at an enormous cost. Nearly 22% of U.S. submarines in the Pacific were lost to counterattack. The U.S. Navy's orders in response were predictable. Proceed with caution. Engagement doctrines tightened. Sub-commanders were warned not to attack large convoys alone. The ocean became a bureaucratic battlefield. Every move, every torpedo launch, logged and approved. Then came Convoy Mi-27. It was a floating fortress, 10 transports escorted by 5 destroyers, moving troops and fuel to Luzon. The convoy carried over 15,000 tons of supplies, 3,000 soldiers, and Japan's last operational oil reserves from Singapore. Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor intercepted its route. The message was clear: high-value target. Approach prohibited unless part of coordinated wolf pack. Walker read that order in silence aboard the Dragonfish. Then he crumpled it and threw it in the trash. "Coordinated wolf pack," he scoffed. "That's Navy code for wait until it's gone." He gathered his officers around the plotting table. The radar screen showed a slow, deliberate pattern. A perfect convoy formation. To anyone else, it was suicide. To Walker, it was geometry. He saw their blind spots, the gaps in sonar coverage, the intervals between destroyer sweeps. He sketched them on a napkin and said, "They've made this perfect. That means they've made it predictable." The plan forming in his head was unprecedented and absolutely forbidden. He wanted to surface at night, close to within 3,000 yards, and fire all torpedo tubes at once. 10 torpedoes, 6 forward, 4 aft, without submerging. Standard procedure required firing 2, then diving. Walker intended to stay up watching every explosion. When his XO stared at him like he'd lost his mind, Walker grinned. "You ever seen a shark attack from under a wave? Neither have they." His strategy broke every engagement rule written since Pearl Harbor. But he didn't care. If it worked, he'd cripple Japan's supply network overnight. If it failed, the Dragonfish and her crew would vanish in a storm of steel and fire. There was no middle outcome. And that's exactly how Walker liked it. The South China Sea, November 27, 1944. Night without stars, waves slapping like whispers of warning. Inside USS Dragonfish, the air was thick. Diesel, sweat, fear. Walker stood over the plotting table with his crew gathered tight, the red light casting long, haunted shadows across their faces. "Gentlemen," he began, tapping a grease pencil against the chart. "The convoy's moving 8 knots, northwest bearing. Escorts spaced evenly at 1-mile intervals. Perfect symmetry. That's their weakness." The XO frowned. "Sir, Navy regs say—" "I know what the Navy says," Walker cut in. "They say, observe, track, report, but I didn't come 6,000 miles to observe." He circled 3 marks on the chart: lead tanker, mid-transport, trailing cargo. "We take the head, the heart, and the tail. 1 salvo, 1 breath. Everything else dies in panic." "Sir, at surface depth, we'll be in visual range," one officer protested. "If they spot us." They will, Walker said flatly. That's why we hit first. At 0032 hours, Dragonfish crept upward. The periscope breached the surface, rain slashing sideways, waves foaming silver in the dark. In the distance, faint lights bobbed across the horizon. The Japanese convoy, 10 fat shadows unaware of the predator rising beneath them. Walker's voice was low, calm. Open outer doors. Ready forward tubes 1 through 6. Aft tubes loaded and locked. The torpedo men moved like ghosts. The sound of hydraulics hissed through the hull. Someone whispered, "We're really doing this." Walker's eyes never left the periscope. "We're doing this because no one else will." At 0040, he gave the command, "Surface." The sub rose into the storm. Water cascaded off her hull like armor shedding fear. The deck watch braced as diesel engines roared to life, their thunder masked by the gale. Lightning flickered across the sea, revealing the convoy dead ahead. Massive silhouettes lined up like targets on a range. The XO whispered, "Sir, they'll see our wake." Walker smiled. "Then they'll know it's too late." He turned to the fire control officer. "Solution? Targets bearing 084, range 2,900 yards, came the reply. Cross-current minimal. Optimal spread 8 degrees. Walker inhaled deeply. "Then let's ruin someone's night. Fire 1 through 6. 6 detonations echoed through the hull as compressed air blasted down the tubes. On the radar repeater, 6 blips arced toward destiny. "Firing aft," Walker ordered. "Tubes 7 through 10. 4 more streaks lit the screen. 10 torpedoes, the entire arsenal, now racing toward the largest Japanese convoy left afloat in the South China Sea. Seconds turned into eternity. The crew stood frozen, eyes locked on the radar scope. 2 minutes, 1 minute, then the ocean erupted. The first torpedo struck the lead tanker dead center, an orange blossom of fire exploding through the rain. The second ripped open a troop transport mid-deck, then a third, fourth, fifth, rapid impacts turning the convoy into chaos. Destroyers panicked, cutting across each other's paths, dropping depth charges into friendly ships. Flames reached 50 feet high. Walker's grin was cold, feral. "Again," he whispered. At 0048 hours, one final explosion tore through the night. A fuel ship hit amidships, splitting in half. Its cargo ignited like a volcano, fire lighting the rain in molten gold. 7 ships hit, the sonar man stammered. "Multiple secondary detonations. Sir, they're done." Walker leaned back, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "That," he said quietly, "is what they call impossible." The clock read 0051. 9 minutes since the first shot. He turned to the helmsman. "Dive, let the fire tell the story." Dragonfish slipped beneath the surface, leaving the South China Sea blazing like judgment itself. The fire didn't fade. It grew. Above the black water, the Japanese convoy disintegrated minute by minute, the ocean glowing orange and red like a forge. Below, inside USS Dragonfish, the crew listened to the sound of destruction, the pings of sonar bouncing off sinking steel, the muffled thunder of collapsing hulls. "Depth charge!" someone shouted. Walker didn't even flinch. He watched the clock tick past 0052, eyes calm, cigarette ember burning steady. "Hold course," he said. "They can't hit what's already under their dead." The destroyers were panicking. The sonar operator tracked their chaos, one moving too fast, another dropping depth charges without bearings. They weren't attacking. They were flailing. 2 screws fading, sonar reported. 3, maybe 4 ships breaking up. "Sir, the lead destroyer's gone silent." Gone silent. 2 words every submariner loved. For 9 minutes, the Pacific roared like a foundry. By the 10th, it went still. Only static filled the speakers. Walker exhaled smoke through his nose. 9 minutes, he muttered. That's faster than the manual says to even fire 6 torpedoes. The math of it was staggering. 10 torpedoes, 9 minutes, 7 confirmed kills. A strike efficiency of 70% in open ocean at night against armed escorts. It was statistically impossible. Even wolf packs, 3 submarines coordinating under ideal conditions, averaged 25%. What Walker had done wasn't just illegal. It defied naval probability. The engineering logs later told the deeper story. Each torpedo had traveled less than 3,000 yards, too close for error. The Japanese formation's perfect spacing had created a deadly rhythm, a resonance of motion. Walker's broadside exploited that pattern, turning symmetry into weakness. The convoy's escorts couldn't compensate fast enough. Naval analysts back at Pearl would later diagram the entire battle on chalkboards. It became known, unofficially, as the 9-minute equation, a perfect example of chaos meeting instinct. But in the moment, down in the belly of the Dragonfish, no one was thinking about math. They were thinking about survival. At 00:55, sonar reported new contacts, more destroyers closing in fast. 10 knots, the helmsman whispered. They're coming straight for us. Walker flicked his cigarette into the bilge. Good, he said. They'll be chasing ghosts. He ordered a dive, 300 feet. The sub creaked under pressure, hull groaning like a living thing. Explosions began again, depth charges hammering the water in violent rhythm. Hold trim, shouted the chief. Compensate ballast. Walker stood unmoving, hand on the periscope column. Each blast shook the lights, dust raining from the bulkheads. Men clenched fists, teeth prayers. Then, silence. 3 minutes passed. 5, 10. Finally, the sonar man whispered, no more pings. The Dragonfish leveled off at 280 feet, quiet, safe. The crew broke into laughter, the kind that comes from surviving something you shouldn't. The XO turned to Walker, still gripping the scope column, knuckles white. Sir, he said, voice cracking. That was 9 minutes of hell. Walker smiled faintly. No, Lieutenant. That was 9 minutes of freedom. They stayed submerged until dawn. When they surfaced, the sea was calm again, except for the oil slicks stretching for miles and the burning remains of ships that had fed an empire. The Japanese shipping network had taken a mortal wound. It didn't know it yet, but it had just died, in exactly 9 minutes. When the Dragonfish limped back into Fremantle 2 weeks later, her paint scorched from pressure depth dives and her torpedo tubes still warm from overuse, the crew expected hero's treatment. Instead, 2 shore patrol jeeps were waiting at the pier. The orders were blunt. Commander Walker to report to operations immediately. Under investigation for violation of Submarine Engagement Protocol 44B. The crew erupted. Disbelief, anger, laughter that bordered on mutiny. They had survived hell and burned an enemy convoy to cinders, yet their captain was being summoned like a criminal. Walker just muttered figures, grabbed his cap, and stepped off the gangway. Inside the operations office, Rear Admiral Lockwood himself sat behind a desk, arms folded. The man was famous, commander of the entire Pacific Submarine Force, known as the Silent Service's father, a man who didn't suffer fools or cowards. Commander Walker, he said evenly, what the hell did you think you were doing? Walker didn't salute. He didn't flinch. Winning the war, sir. Lockwood held up a report. 8 pages of typed witness statements, radar logs, and an engineering complaint from the Bureau of Ordnance labeling Walker's 10 torpedoes spread reckless disregard for safety and procedure. You fired every torpedo you had, the Admiral said. You surfaced in visual range. You violated 6 standing orders. And yet, he flipped to another page, eyes narrowing. Intelligence confirms 7 confirmed sinkings, 2 probable, and the complete destruction of a major enemy convoy. Is that accurate? Walker nodded. Yes, sir. 9 minutes. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush steel. Lockwood leaned back, tapping the paper with a finger. "You realize if this had failed, you'd be a headline and a cautionary tale." "Yes, sir," Walker said, straight-faced. "But it didn't." A faint smile flickered across the Admiral's face, quickly suppressed. "The Bureau of Ordnance wants your head. They say your tactics endanger future crews." "With respect, sir," Walker said, "caution kills more crews than courage ever did." Lockwood's eyes glinted. "You think you're smarter than the Navy, Commander?" "No, sir," Walker said, voice low but sharp. "Just faster." For a long time, Lockwood said nothing. Then he sighed, closed the report, and slid it aside. "I can't give you a medal for this. I can't even put it in the books. But I'll be damned if I'll court-martial a man for doing what the rest of us are too scared to try." Walker straightened, almost smiling. "Appreciate that, sir." Lockwood added, "You understand this conversation never happened." "Wouldn't dream of it," Walker said. Before he left, the Admiral looked up one last time. "You changed something out there, Walker. Just don't let it change you." Back aboard Dragonfish, the crew gathered around, waiting. Walker just said, "We're cleared for next patrol." The men erupted. Cheers, laughter, slaps on the back. To them, he wasn't just a captain anymore. He was living proof that the impossible could be done if you had the nerve to do it wrong on purpose. Officially, there was no mention of the 9-minute attack in any Navy communique. But the fleet grapevine was faster than censorship. Within weeks, submarine captains across the Pacific were whispering about it. A phantom operation that sank an entire convoy through sheer defiance. They called it Walker's War. And while headquarters pretended it never happened, every man who heard the story knew one truth. Somewhere in the South China Sea, a rule book was still burning. By early 1945, Walker's War was spreading faster than official doctrine could contain it. What began as rumor became routine. Word-of-mouth tactics, scribbled notes passed between skippers during resupply, quiet late-night engine room conversations, they all carried fragments of one idea. Don't hide. Hit first. It started small. A few captains on the USS Batfish and USS Hawkbill began experimenting with surface shadowing, stalking convoys at visual range, using radar only in bursts to avoid detection. Then came the rapid salvo. 3 torpedoes fired within 5 seconds instead of the standard 30. Both were technically illegal under current Navy orders. Both worked. Within months, convoy kill rates doubled. The Imperial Navy's once impenetrable supply routes began collapsing. Between January and March 1945, Allied submarines destroyed over 1.4 million tons of Japanese shipping, the highest 3-month total of the entire war. Unofficially, they were all using variations of Walker's method. One captain, Commander Roger Kent of the USS Lionfish, described it bluntly in his patrol log. "We engaged at 3,200 yards, surface radar on, multiple tubes, cited as unauthorized multi-angle strike. Results? 4 ships sunk, no casualties. Tell Walker his ghost rides with us." The phrase "Walker's ghost" became a rallying cry across the fleet. Mechanics began marking torpedo tubes with chalk drawings of a shark wearing a captain's cap. Crewmen bragged about being 9-minute certified. Officially, there was no recognition. The Navy couldn't endorse it without admitting it had been wrong. Yet deep inside the submarine pens of Pearl Harbor, doctrine officers quietly began revising the manuals. One page in the 1945 Submarine Operations Manual was changed without announcement. It read, "Under special combat conditions, simultaneous torpedo launches and aggressive surface engagements may be executed at the commanding officer's discretion." No one said it aloud, but everyone knew who wrote that paragraph with his deeds. Meanwhile, the Japanese merchant fleet disintegrated. By spring, less than 20% of Japan's pre-war tonnage was still afloat. Oil shipments from Borneo and Palembang ceased entirely. Battleships sat idle for lack of fuel. The empire was starving, all because one submarine commander refused to obey the speed limit. But Walker didn't celebrate. On his 14th patrol, the Dragonfish rescued survivors from a sunken Japanese freighter. Among them were civilian sailors, barefoot, burned, terrified. As they were hauled aboard, one looked at Walker and whispered through a translator, "You are the storm." Walker stared at the man for a long time, then said quietly, "No, I just stopped waiting for permission." Back at Fremantle, his legend grew even faster than his record. New captains requested to train under him. Admirals pretended not to know why their kill rates had improved so dramatically. Even the British Royal Navy sent observers, calling his tactics submarine blitzkrieg. The irony was inescapable. The man who broke the rules had just defined the next generation of them. By war's end, the U.S. Navy credited coordinated rapid strike submarine tactics for crippling Japan's logistical backbone, though the official reports made no mention of where it started. In private, Admiral Lockwood sent Walker a single-line message. "You were right about the math." Walker never replied. He just taped the note above his bunk and went topside to watch the sunset, his ocean, his rules. When the war ended, the Dragonfish returned to Pearl Harbor under radio silence. There were no bands, no cameras, no reporters waiting on the dock. The brass couldn't celebrate something they had once labeled gross misconduct. Walker stepped ashore as the most effective and least decorated submarine captain in the Pacific. His combat record was classified, his name omitted from official dispatches. But inside the mess halls, every submariner knew the truth. He had changed the way the ocean was fought. Historians later struggled to categorize him. Was he a tactical genius or a maniac who got lucky? His attack plan, now known unofficially as the Walker pattern, was studied at the Naval War College under the term rapid saturation engagement. The math behind it was simple but terrifying. Hit too fast for the enemy to react, overwhelm their sensors, and turn coordination into chaos. The Navy hated it, but it worked. In the post-war years, Walker was invited, unofficially but to consult on submarine training programs. He refused every offer. "They want me to teach how to break rules safely," he told his XO once. "There's no safe way to break rules, that's the point." Still, his fingerprints showed up everywhere. By 1950, the Navy's new doctrine of aggressive submerged pursuit, a hybrid of Wolfpack and Walker's surface tactics, was fully institutionalized. His defiance had become regulation. But the man himself didn't seek glory. When journalists tracked him down for interviews, he declined. "The ocean already has my story," he said. "Go ask her." In private, though, he kept logs, pages of scribbled equations, crude sketches of torpedo arcs, handwritten notes about human psychology under pressure. In one entry he wrote, "Every rule is written in calm. War isn't calm." He wasn't the first to challenge command, but he was the one who proved that victory sometimes depends on disobedience, and that courage is often measured in how far you're willing to push past permission. When declassified decades later, reports confirmed what no one could say out loud in 1944. Walker's illegal 9-minute attack didn't just destroy a convoy. It forced Japan to reroute supply lines, leaving tens of thousands of soldiers stranded without food or fuel. It shortened the war by months. The Navy quietly acknowledged it with an internal memo. "Actions of CMDR-C Walker demonstrate unorthodox methods may yield disproportionate results. Recommend further study into adaptive engagement doctrines." In bureaucratic terms, that was as close as they'd ever get to saying he was right. Walker once told a young ensign who asked if he ever regretted it, "Regret is for men who had a choice. I didn't. It was either break the rules or bury my crew." That line became legend. Even now, submarine commanders still quote him in training rooms. 9 minutes. That's all it takes if you're bold enough. His name may not sit beside Nimitz or Halsey in the textbooks, but among the men who dive beneath the waves, Charles Ironhand Walker is remembered as something rarer. The man who proved that audacity, when timed right, is indistinguishable from genius. Because in war, the line between reckless and right isn't drawn by command. It's drawn by whoever lives long enough to write the report. And Walker lived. After the war, Charles Ironhand Walker vanished from the headlines as easily as he once vanished beneath the waves. He retired quietly to Monterey, California, a small coastal town where the sound of surf was enough to remind him of diesel engines and sonar pings. Neighbors knew him only as the old Navy man with the limp. He fixed fishing boats for pocket money, refused to hang his medals, and kept a brass ship's bell from the Dragonfish on his porch. The inscription had worn smooth, but he'd re-engraved it himself. 9 minutes to freedom. Every morning he'd ring it once, not for remembrance, but as a habit. A captain should always answer roll call, he'd tell kids passing by. When a young reporter from Life magazine tracked him down in 1957 and asked, "Do you ever think about what you did that night?" Walker paused, looked out at the horizon and said, "Every time the tide turns. The ocean forgives faster than men do." He died in 1966, buried with no fanfare, his service record still partially redacted. But decades later, when naval archives finally opened, historians found a small note attached to his debrief file. Unofficial commendation. Outstanding initiative under fire. Result, decisive victory. That was all. No medal, no speech. Just the truth, written small enough to fit on one line. Because that was Walker's war. No glory, no permission, just results. And somewhere in the deep, where the water still remembers, a single bell rings through the dark. One captain, one decision, 9 minutes that changed everything.